You're listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. In this episode, we'll be featuring the new strategy for author events, a session that was presented at Children's Institute 2024 in New Orleans.
I am the event coordinator and kids specialist at Blue Willow Bookshop on Houston's West Side. We are a fully general bookstore. I have been there for 20 years.
Hello, I'm Tu Doan. I am a kids buyer at East Bay Booksellers in Oakland, California. I've been there for about 4 years, and before that I was at Brazos Bookstore in Houston, Texas. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Casey Robinson. I am at the Silver Unicorn Bookstore in Acton, Massachusetts, just northwest of Boston. I've been running events there for about 3 years now.
Hi everyone, my name is Angie. I'm the events and marketing manager at BBGB. We are in Richmond, Virginia. We're the children's specialty bookstore of Richmond, Virginia. So we've got a tiny little adult section, everything else is children's. It's the opposite of a general interest bookstore.
We're glad to see you all here. So we've done our introductions. We're going to dive right in. How many total author events was your bookstore doing before the pandemic, and how many is your bookstore doing now? And have these event types shifted? We'll start with you two.
Okay, so at our bookstore, before the pandemic, we were doing about 3 to 4 events per week in the store.
Right.
And after the pandemic, we have done 10 events. 10.
Total. It's a pretty big shift.
We'll probably get to hear a little bit more about that.
We'll unpack that.
At the Silver Unicorn before the pandemic, we were doing similar, I would say, to two. We were doing 3 to 4 events a week. Now we do 2 a week, 1 during the week, 1 on the weekends, typically. We don't do a lot over the summer because everyone splits for the Cape or Maine. But I would say the feeling of the event planning shift is one of distillation. So we've really honed what we're doing, and I know we're going to spend a good amount of time talking about that today, but it's definitely fewer events and more intentionally scheduled.
Last year, 2023, we did about 106. And I wish I could tell you that we did, how many we did per week, but the reality is our goal is we're trying to make events. I'm trying to be able to measure it on a weekly basis, but things are so fractured, and we could have 1 week packed full of events, and then the next 4 weeks there's absolutely nothing. So that's the reality.
How many of us became television producers during the pandemic? I now have a graduate degree, practically. But I think that is something that we all learn to do, and we will unpack that a little bit, too. So, Casey, this is going to kind of going towards your comment about distillation. The beginning informs the rest. What I think all 4 of us do now is, what is the purpose, and why are we doing it? So, Casey, why don't we start with you?
I think about events, obviously we think about them singularly, right? We want to make a great event. We want people to come, buy lots of books. We want happy authors and illustrators to leave our stores and speak really highly of their experience in our bookstore. But I also think about events in aggregate as an extension and an opportunity to extend our brand. So what do we want people to feel about the store? And what role does events play in facilitating that? So it's as much about the individual event as it is about the bigger picture. And that can impact everything. It impacts the way that you communicate with your authors. It impacts the way that you promote your events. It impacts the way you make your guests, authors, and illustrators feel, what you choose to hand them for store swag on their way out. I think that it's just a sort of I try to think, with one eye on the individual execution of the individual event, but also with one eye on the bigger picture, because it reminds me that there's purpose to being really thoughtful about the kinds of events you're holding, the mix of events you're holding, the variety, right, the formats. It gives you permission. It actually asks of you to be a little bit creative about what you're doing. So it's, I feel like that perspective can also be a little bit of a source of fuel for me as I'm looking at a large calendar of things happening that I have to execute. It's just it's a slightly different angle, I guess. And I think that happens in the wake of something like having to be a video producer for a good 18 months of events on your screen.
Well, Casey, I love what you said just about events being so much more than that word, event. And I think especially as a children's bookseller, children's events are hard, and I would argue that they are in many ways more difficult than adult events. The skill and coordination that it takes to take two, at least, the child and the parent, two completely different and often conflicting interests of those audiences. And then if you're like us, we wouldn't exist without our school partnerships. That's the cornerstone of our business model. And then you're adding a whole separate audience in there as well of librarians and educators. Being a space and creating this time and space to bring all of those audiences together and have them look and celebrate the same thing. It's more than just an event. It's almost like the heart of the actual bookstore. And when I'm at an event, say if it's, we have a line of people for a signing even, and they're all chatting, I'm like, I'm seeing exactly what, I'm seeing in real life what I'm seeing the manifestation of what we've been working for and what we work for every single day, right there. And to that, I just quickly want to add that I think we talked briefly during the planning call about how there are so many opportunities for an event to have a life outside of the shop, whether that's documenting it on social media and the conversations that are inspired that the audience will take home after the event. So I guess my point is, it's what you're creating here is not just a 45 or 1 hour time slot for people to get their book signed.
Do you have something to add?
Sure. So there are 5 of us on staff, and we do everything, every single role. And we survived those 2 to 3 years together, and it really took us a long time to get back into events. We had lots of customers asking when we would do events again. It was every day, and when the space would be available. And it was really up to us, because we're such a tight group, that we became comfortable with the idea of doing them again. And the owner of the store, who was one of the 5, he asked us, do y'all want to do events anymore? And for the first 2 years, we said no. No one has the energy for that, and he respected our staff. And I think that what's important is that the people that are in the bookstore are happy. And when we were finally ready to do events, it really showed, and we have very big and meaningful events, so hence 10 events.
So before the pandemic, Blue Willow did about 400 a year. I am perpetually tired. Since the pandemic, and during the pandemic, we did more than 700 virtual events. I am perpetually tired. So beforehand, we would find a reason to say no. Like, we would automatically say yes unless we had a reason to say no. Now, we consider why we would say yes. We're still doing 300 to 350 events a year, but we are more deliberate in our decision to say yes. Is it because we have a relationship with the author and they want us and they want to come back and our customers want to see them? Is it because we have a relationship with a publisher and the publisher is like, we really want to send this author to your store? Is it customer service? We have customers who keep asking us for this author. Or is it employee service? There's I really want to meet this author. I want this author to come. And that enthusiasm then builds to spreading throughout the rest of the staff and to your customer base and bleeds onto your social media. So beforehand, we would almost always say yes, and now we consider why we should say yes. Because, to Tu's point, this is different, and we need to have a reason internally so everybody's on board. Sales and ticketing. Decision-making has changed for the public, so we are seeing an increase in last-minute ticket sales. How have you had to change your decision-making process in terms of deciding how many tickets you're going to have, what kind of space you're going to use? And has it ever had to shift? Who wants to go first?
I'll just talk about, it's inevitable, at least with us, there are going, and we've tried and gotten better at avoiding low turnout and preventing that as much as possible, and that's in part to just mandatory RSVPs even for our free events. We need some way to manage expectations on behalf of every single event partner and our staff and the author. And but I would say when we have run into those devastating moments where there's not even one person in the crowd for, say, like a local author, something that kind of just came out on a whim with myself and the author I was with was, we're going to make this into a virtual interview that you can put on your website. And that is what this event is going to be. Oh. Share it with whoever you want. If anyone wants to come in, then they can join the interview. They can join the conversation. And so that was a very sort of truly last minute. There was no idea beforehand that this was going to happen, but it's almost become something that we can fall back on. It's still an optimistic and fruitful production that comes out of it.
Do you mind repeating which platform were you using?
We were using Crowdcast. Yes.
Well, yes. Sorry, Sean was asking what platform did BBGB use for their last-minute, spur-of-the-moment, wonderful virtual event that the author could put on their website.
Yes. Yeah, and that was Crowdcast. And Crowdcast is what we used because, like I said, when I started, it was solely virtual events. Any of the public-facing events that we were doing were Crowdcast. There's an advantage to where there's no option of being able to see the audience members because that is absolutely not something that you want during a virtual event.
We don't ticket for our events. Our space is not huge. I mean, we can fit probably 50, we could probably fit 100 people in the store if we move all the shelves on wheels and, encourage cozy standing behavior. But we don't ask for RSVPs for our regular in-store events. When we're doing something off-site, a larger event will arrange, or publishers asking us to do a ticketed with book sale sort of arrangement, we'll do that. I find them very stressful watching the ticket numbers over and over refreshing. And we haven't run into too many of the events where, there's nobody there. Occasionally, if we have a couple of authors coming from out of town and they don't have a local tie, these are the things that on my mental checklist, I try to anticipate in advance. So, if I have someone, especially a debut coming from out of state, I try to pair them in conversation with somebody local who has a good reach, a good crowd. I have made phone calls to friends, calling in favors to have them come and sit in the front row so I can take some photos and ask good questions. But so there's always that. I feel like we all share that in common, that please, please, please come. Please, people, please come. That feeling right before an event. But we just don't have, I don't know, I guess it's a store philosophy that we don't do. We do Eventbrite. We use Eventbrite for our larger events. We just started doing a kids graphic novel festival. This year it was 3,000 people who came. Yeah. So we really needed to know what we were up for with that. And it's free, but we are very much relying on that data to tell us, that we need to ask the town to close the small street on the side of our store. And we do need to rent that large wedding size tent for all of our authors, those types of things. But Eventbrite's been really helpful for that.
So the first event that we hosted was in store, and it was a very large event for a local author. I think that in our particular market and neighborhood, we're very privileged to have a lot of author events that are sure things, that you have the local connection, you have the visibility, et cetera, et cetera. The author is a great self-marketer. But after that first event, we realized that the 5 of us were at a certain threshold where we did not have the energy to move fixtures and put up and take out chairs and clean our whole store before the event. So we switched to completely off-site, and we found a permanent partner. And for this particular venue, which is a brewery that's nearby, there are a lot of rules about ticketing and whether you can charge people to get in. So all of our events are free. And we do use Eventbrite for RSVPs, just so that we have an idea for ordering. But that's about it. It's pretty simple.
We use Eventbrite for ticketing if it's a ticket with book, and we use a Google form on our event page saying, please RSVP, because if you've been to Blue Willow, it's the size of a shoebox and there's fixtures everywhere, and we have to figure out how, we want to know how little we have to move to fit all the chairs in. So it just gives us a gauge, and it also gives us a gauge of how much the author is pushing it out, how responsive our social media posts are, are people clicking through from the newsletter, things like that. So that kind of gives us a running total. One thing that our notes say is last minute pivots we've had to make. I live in Texas. I have had a school visit canceled on 12 hours warning. So my suggestion to all of you is have either venues or school contacts in your back pocket so you can text someone at 5 o'clock at night and say, hey, can I bring a New York Times bestselling author to your campus tomorrow morning? And they will say yes.
Oh, can I add to that?
Please add to that.
So, on the other hand, we have been the store where the event of another store has pivoted and canceled the event, and we are the hosts. And I think that's because our flexibility makes it possible, and it's because we solely these pivots, not to be specific. Solely these pivots have been because we are really engaged with our community, and it's something that we do out of goodwill.
So, we're going to move to the next slide because I think, okay, setting and achieving goals. How have our goals changed since the pandemic? So how has your timeline for planning and running an event shifted? Who wants to start?
Well, okay, so I'll just say the overall goal, I believe, for events hasn't changed since before the pandemic to now. And the ultimate goal is, like, I want the author and the audience to walk out of that event feeling like a connection has been made, and then they're taking that home with them. And then I think that that's the primary goal. The secondary goal is the event done? Did it happen? Because that's something that I've had, and my team has had to reconcile, is that sometimes it's more important for the event to get done than for it to be perfect. And obviously, we're going to, like, and that's not at all to say we're going to move past an event because it's done and not do any kind of reflection. And something I've been talking to folks about at this conference is really having those difficult conversations with event partners after an event has happened and everything has not gone perfectly. And I would say that, and really quickly, I do want to talk about just the nitty-gritty of ordering. We have absolutely shifted our timeline in terms of we're ordering like 4 to 5 weeks out before an event date, and I'm eyeing event orders coming in like a hawk and promptly checking for any damages. Our reps are incredible. If you email them immediately and call in for damages and tell them this is an event order, we have typically not run into any kind of problems getting books on time. That being said, Ingram is my best friend in the entire world, and we have been, thankfully, not having to run into those moments super often where we have to rely on Ingram, but it does happen. But I would say overall, in any of the touch points that I'm sending out to say if I'm coordinating a school visit and we're taking pre-orders for the book, I want to avoid setting our store up for making promises that we can't keep. So in any of the messaging in a flyer or marketing material directing families to order books, we have very clear timelines. If you place your order 3 weeks before the event date, you are guaranteed going to be able to get your book on the day of the event. But if it's after the 3 weeks out date, it's going to be sometime the following week or even the next week. And so that just alleviates us from being in the hot seat if a parent orders their book late and, their child didn't get their book that they ordered, but their friend who did order on time did.
Clear expectations.
Yeah.
I don't remember where it is on the slide, but I think this is important. Talking about being candid and having difficult conversations. Because we're all on the same, with your community partners, whether it's a publisher or a venue or a school, because we're all in community to make this event work. So who wants to touch on that?
What's the question?
Why is it important to have, I just kind of gave the answer, but why is it important? Let's dig a little deeper into having hard conversations and being candid and kind.
I'll just say you're doing a disservice to any event partner if you're not being transparent with them about how the event went, about any concerns. I'll just talk about school visits since that's our bread and butter. A school visit requires, as you guys know, multiple different institutions to come together to make something happen. I don't know if you guys have ever tried to move one classroom of kindergartners from one space to another. It's absolutely insane. And then for a school visit, it's times 10 of those classrooms. These schools are working incredibly hard to make these visits happen. The shop, our bookstore, is working incredibly hard to sell books and to get these families excited about the upcoming visit. And then more than often, we run into the case where an author doesn't quite know their audience or how to keep them engaged. And the visit itself it doesn't meet the expectations that all of this preparation that we had done led up to. And it's so easy, I totally understand, it's so easy in the planning and the coordinating, the itinerary and the logistics to overlook the event itself and whether the event actually made an impact. But I mean, in those experiences, we find giving an honest report to the author's publicist, copying their rep, has been effective in making sure that at least we've done our piece, we've tried our best, and it's like, this information is for you. And I would say more than often, publishers are incredibly receptive and thankful and seeking out this information because they don't often get it.
Yeah, I agree. I think one sort of framework that we've tried to adopt related to all things events is a posture of curiosity. So that means, I wonder how this could have been different or better. I wonder why this felt hectic or rushed, or wow, this went really well. Why was that? What were all the pieces that contributed to this running smoothly? And then, going from what you think you know to what you actually know usually involves putting it to words. So having that conversation with the publicists, it's in an effort to better the ecosystem, really. We started noticing when we have an author coming that, we can't do more than 2 school visits in a day, especially if there's an evening event. And they need downtime. So if the school doesn't have a spot, like an actual spot, not like a converted closet, for them to unwind or relax, then we need to create that for them.
Yes.
At the store. Who's going to get the author lunch? What kinds of things do they want for lunch? What are they allergic to? I mean, you need to think about these things in advance as you would a friend visiting you from out of town, right? So it's care and it's curiosity, and then it's closing the loop on the other end with the author, with the schools, with it's all, everyone's trying to do their best. So sometimes it's just the actions that prove that you're trying to do your best can really make a difference.
And I think the bottom line is that transparency will set you up for success. As an independent bookstore, we are fostering human connection with our communities, and if we cannot be honest with one another and sometimes the event has happened and that nothing else can be done. We are always working towards improving, and I think that just needs to be reflected in how we connect with all the functions within our bookstore.
I agree with everything all y'all said. I think it's important, like my colleagues have said, is to be kindly candid, and if you're asked to do 3 school visits and an in-store event and they're flying out that night, to maybe gently suggest that that's not the best course of action. For us, my easy throwdown is Houston is the size of Rhode Island. I can't do 4 school visits, but you also have to look at campus scheduling. Instructional time is so critical across the country. We need to be as mindful of that as we can. Additionally, Houston is the size of Rhode Island. If they're going to fly out, we can't do a 5 p.m. or a 7 p.m. event because it's not going to happen. And I found that publicists appreciate having that information. So feel free to share that and offer a constructive solution. You know, the author doesn't need to drive 45 minutes to the Houston airport to fly 30 minutes to Austin. Could just use a car service. And it's less cost than a ticket and less time for the author, because author care is important. Okay, I'm like moving all over the place, and I do want to leave time for questions. So let's touch, we've done that. We're going to give you an activity. I think one of the things all four of us talked about during our planning call was reframing event success. So instead of thinking of things as scarce, think in terms of abundance. What did go right? Like Angie has said, the event has ended and people have left with this experience that we can then share on social media, or two has said, we're creating these communities. How can you reframe your event success in those terms? So we're going to give you about, it says 3 minutes, but I'm going to give you about 90 seconds to think about how you, let's start thinking of how, from abundance, how can we make define our success that way. So it's, I think we end at 9:45. Is it 9:50? I'm so good. But I think I'm going to move to questions in like 2 or 3 minutes, because there's going to be to move to Q&A because we've only got about 15 minutes left, and we do want to make space for questions that you might have. Just a friendly reminder that this is a 5-star session and you liked it. But so if you have questions and you are able, please walk forward to the microphone. I will remind you that a question is something you want to know. It is not, I have a cat.
Can I just say one quick thing about abundance?
Of course.
I was thinking about all the different kinds of events that we do. I know all of you do many different kinds of events as well. And, you know, I can talk about the small event that had 4 kids come, and they sat right in the front and they clutched their well-worn copies of the book to their chests. And I can tell you we probably sold 2 books that night because they already had the books. But the absolute awe and joy on those kids' faces, that event was a success, right? I can talk about the self-pubbed memoir, we all have those, that we did for a community member, and she packed the house. Packed it. And she was absolutely beloved. And she sold, I mean, her book was on our top 10 list for months and months. She was one of the best self-promoters I had ever met. That event was also a success. And so I think as we think about, of course we need to stay in business. Of course we want to sell lots of books. Of course we want to have flashy names to promote on our social media. But I just think it's really important that we think broadly about why we're doing it and what it means for our store, and what Angie said earlier about connection is true. You know, people, I think it's a big part of building trust. Like what we're doing is building trust with events. And once you have that trust, you've built that brand, and people will come for the things that they really feel connected to. And I think that's the whole purpose of doing this work, you know?
That's a great point. That's a great point. All right, here we go.
So our our book fair and our Authors in School program has changed a lot post-COVID, and we have experienced kind of increasingly more pushback from admin about not wanting to lose class time. And, we try to explain how valuable both book fairs and author events are. And obviously our librarians and our teachers get it, but we are still getting that pushback from admin. And I was just wondering if you guys had any kind of success in, I don't know, like a little nugget of wisdom I can just pop in there.
Angie?
I am devastated to hear that, number one, but thank you for sharing. That is a nugget we haven't had to deal with that, and we're fortunate in that way, but I think that speaks to something larger as it relates to authors in schools, and the school needs to be on board, right? The school, not just the librarian, because we've met so many incredible, dedicated, just like superhero librarians with a principal who couldn't care less, And it's so unfortunate that that's the case, because those kids are just, they're completely missing out, right? And it's been a struggle, because we have lost school partners because of that very reason, because the entire school is not on board. And I try and tell myself, I want whichever author I'm bringing, I want them to be received by everybody. And so I wish I could give you an answer for how to combat tough admin. I would say if you can reach the families, because there are so many. If there's an author that's coming, there's bound to be families that are itching and excited for an author to come to that school. So I would say if there is any way to reach those families and you're having a shop event with that author, you can still reach the kids in those schools via the librarian. It's obviously not an ideal solution, because we're missing out on so many of those other kids, but.
Tie it to test scores. I'm not kidding you. Tie it to test scores. Look, remember the somewhat depressing thing that Brenda showed us yesterday, where there was that really big down. I can't remember the exact numbers, but students who don't read score significantly lower, and students who do read on a regular basis score higher. And then there was that 6 slide, the 6 panels on suggestions. All of them were about how important it is to read. Tie that to test scores.
Nice.
Good morning. Thank you all for sharing your wisdom. My question is this in regards to outside of schools. For events that we're partnering with publishers, usually we're reporting back to those publishers. And this also speaks to the idea of abundance and how we frame success. So usually, of course, those publishers are just looking for the sales numbers, but that doesn't tell the full story. So I wonder if there are other pieces that you include. So, for example, I've looked at how our social media reach and other things have kind of pushed out. But I'm just curious if you also include other data points in that report back.
Yeah, I do, for sure. It's part of an ongoing conversation. So hopefully, I've already had a good rapport with the publicist leading up to the event. I certainly report the sales numbers. I talk about how much promotion we wrapped around that event. Our newsletter goes to 10,000 people and that kind of thing. Like, we did all these posts, and we're gonna, our booksellers are excited to hand sell the signed copies. We have a face-out display of the signed copies. All just kind of like wrapping it up. So more than just, we sold 30 copies. I think it's important. I think it's kind of a nice cadence, and then it's like a good taste in your mouth, to take on the next conversation and the next event.
So I worked for 5 years at a store that also did 400 events a year, and I left in August 2019 to do something that wasn't book selling. I now work remotely for a bookstore whose owners bought their store in August of 2019. So I have only known pre-pandemic events, and they have only known this. Currently, my job is building their events program, and specifically filling out their grids. What I would like to know or have any thoughts on is how can I be sure that I am not over-promising when I'm getting to these grids and it says estimated attendance, estimated sales, in particular because this store has not kept great records on that information from the in-person events that they have done. I'm doing the best I can to try to get that information from them now, but I'm really concerned that I'm promising too much.
I don't promise too much.
I don't. So I think what I would do in that space is throw some spaghetti at the wall and make a general, like, based on your best knowledge, this is what I think would happen. And then when you get the event inquiry, manage expectations from the get-go and move forward and say, this is what we're going to do. It's going to be a beautiful event. This is how it's going to go. This is how we're going to promote it. So you're setting yourself up for success, and then, continuing to manage expectations. I think, and also I think being candid about here's where we are. We're in the process of doing this. We have a great team, and gather your data so you have it. Oh, I have a hand in the back. Hand in the back.
Hi, Kathy.
Oh, hi, Dominique.
So I want to speak to that point. I can't speak for all publishers, but I can speak for mine. What we encourage very strongly is when you're adding those numbers in, they're quick and dirty numbers, right? What we encourage you to say is this is what we're estimating. As you're planning your event, stay in touch with the publicists that you're working with and let them know as your event is being planned, okay, this number's changed or this number's changed. This is what we're seeing as we're promoting it. This way there's visibility and transparency from start to finish so that all expectations can be managed and met.
Thank you, publisher partner. My friend here in the fabulous jacket.
Thank you. It's been a great panel. So I own a bookstore with my mom. We're a pretty small bookstore in Chicago, and I have recently taken over the events and everything. We were online for a while, but we have been back in store since 2021. I want to know, because we have started to do a lot of programming and a lot of events with authors, and of course we get a lot of approach from like local authors and self-published authors. I just want to pick your minds. What are some requirements that you require from those authors for these events? Do you require, of course we want them to promote, but do you require them to, do their own flyer? Are they required just what are some things that you require from them? Because sometimes I feel like they kind of look at me as their personal assistant, and I'm like, I kind of have a store to run. I can't do everything. So I just, if I could get some feedback, it'll kind of help me get my plan straightforward with them.
Yeah, that's a great question because the work and labor that goes into event publicity is definitely, from what I've been hearing, not spread across all of the event partners in the way that it needs to be. Mm-hmm. We are, and our whole conversation has been revolving around transparency. We make it very clear to our event partners, whether it's mostly the publicist I'm talking to, about authors being able to pull their weight in promoting their event. These authors have social media accounts. They have their following. It's almost the bare minimum that authors are going to be self-promoting their event. And in fact, that's oftentimes where the bulk of the attendance will come from, right? And not just some random store that's on their regional tour. And so we are very candid with publicists and about authors being able to pull that weight themselves as well.
There's also a little bit of education that needs to happen around local authors. If they're not coming through a publicist, then there is, you could put something up on your website. just standard language that you find yourself repeating all the time. But it's a partnership, and we will do what we do for all of our visiting authors. We will, create a social graphic. We encourage you to, cross-promote, recruit your friends and family, do all the things, but state it explicitly that that's part of it. And we have a program we do for everyone. It's the same. We don't do flyers. We don't, if you want to go stand with a billboard on the corner and wave your hands and, point to your book cover, great. We encourage that, but that's not something we're going to do,
Yeah, I think you know the answer. Our bunch is not technologically savvy, so we have a template for our expectations. Everything is pretty transparent, and we do create flyers for the event, but there are examples of our flyers, and they look like they're made on PowerPoint, and so it's kind of like, if you want this flyer, then, that's the expectation, and you can either send us one that you would prefer, or that's what it is. And, we have an equal amount of marketing, but ultimately it is up to them, and it does require education, and it serves them in the long run.
Get my card afterwards.
Okay, thank you so much.
You are welcome. On that note, we are out of time.
Thank you for listening to Book to the Bookstore Education Podcast, brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA website at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!